Good morning, Lucy, Victoria, and Helen. How are you all?
Good, thanks.
Hey, Lucy, how are you?
Hello. Sorry, I missed your. I just didn't connect to audio, so hello.
No worries. Hey, how are you?
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you today?
Yeah, buzzing. It's such a nice morning here. Got out on a walk and it's sunny and yeah, just really good.
Oh, I'm so pleased for you. That's so important.
I'm excited for this as well. It's going to be good.
Yeah, it will be fun because this one's going to be obviously a little bit different. That's two past, so let's give it like one more minute just before I get into it a little bit, because I believe Erin did say she is coming, and then we'll get into this lesson. But before we kind of get into it, does anyone have any questions in advance about loss of the menstrual cycle? And then obviously I can make sure that they are covered, basically, because it's a bit of a broad subject, and I know a lot of you probably have very different experiences working with different types of clients. So those of you that are comp prep coaches, you'll probably see this a lot more than those of you that are working with Gen Pop, although it is still pretty prevalent these days, unfortunately. So yeah, if anyone wants to turn their audio on and ask any questions before we start, please feel free. Cool, I'm taking that as everyone's good. Awesome, Erin's here. Okay, let's get into it. So, Victoria, I'll introduce you in 1 second, but let me just explain how this lesson is going to work a little bit. Oh, cool. Miles is here too. Awesome. So, obviously, yeah, for today's lesson, as you all know, something a little bit different because my client, Victoria, has very kindly agreed to do this lesson with me, which is going to be fun. So there's a few kind of advantages to that, which I'm really looking forward to. The main one is you don't have to just listen to me speak, which I'm sure will be a very nice change of pace. But also what it does is it means we can really look at this from the psychology of the client standpoint. And I feel like that's going to be quite invaluable, really, especially for those of you that are maybe a bit newer to coaching, because you potentially haven't gone through a journey with a client of 6+ months with this kind of amount of communication, potentially with the severity of this type of problem. And Victoria's a great client in terms of checking in and communication. So hopefully that's going to add a lot of value. But also why this should be really awesome for a lot of you is, even if you're not dealing with clients who have lost their menstrual cycle, the psychology of gaining weight and upping food is always difficult for females, and of course males, but in particular females, right, for the obvious reasons. So this is going to be relevant even if you don't have a client that's lost their menstrual cycle. You may still have to reverse diet them, and potentially they might have to gain weight, but maybe not, for whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. It might just be that they've bottomed out calories really low and you can't go lower with their calories and continue losing weight. It might be that you're obviously coming out of the back of a show where weight gain needs to happen and calorie intake needs to go up. So there's different situations where we might need to still up calories and potentially even gain weight with female clients outside and away from just losing the menstrual cycle. So yeah, I'm really excited for you all to hear kind of the psychology of gaining weight and upping food from a client standpoint, and obviously the struggles and barriers that brings. And we'll talk a lot about the practical application of getting a client to do this stuff, because as we spoke about in week 1, well, this is week 1, sorry, Monday, all of that stuff which can be really powerful, like your stress management techniques, focusing on sleep, doing meditation, all of that stuff which we all know is really powerful as coaches, and often we have to get our clients to do. Ideally, it can be really hard to get them to actually do that and get them to buy into that, right? Because they don't have time, they don't see the importance, but sometimes it is an essential component of fixing whatever problem it is that we're talking about. And obviously there's no point just explaining why that's important if you can't go away and actually get your clients to buy into that. So we will talk about obviously the physiology side of it as well, but we'll kind of skim over that a little bit because all of the subsequent moving parts that are relevant here, we will get to in the relevant week's lessons. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but we're also going to have a heavy focus on kind of the psychology side of it from the client standpoint, basically. So if that sounds good to everyone, and if that makes sense, then over to you, Victoria. Who are you, and how do you lose your menstrual cycle?
Hi, I'm Victoria. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm Victoria. I have worked in the fashion industry for quite a few years now, and I suppose at some point that may have been part of the reason that I lost my menstrual cycle. I had pretty normal periods, I'd say, until about a year and a bit ago. Was it now? About a year ago. And then I lost my period, and I thought, I didn't really know why, and then realised looking back and working with Leo that it was because I was extremely underweight. And Leo literally changed my life with this. I tried other things. I kind of went to other sources, but since working with Leo, I now have my period back, and it's great.
Awesome. Yeah, elaborate that on a little bit more if that's okay, Victoria. Like, what do you do? Why did you have to be underweight? And obviously for you as well, there was a little bit of stress, which wasn't just weight related, and there was a little bit of sleep as well going on.
Yeah, so I wasn't told that I needed to lose weight. It's kind of just being in that environment and working in that industry that I suppose I felt I got kind of caught up in it. With stress, that was probably one of the biggest things I hadn't realised implemented the loss of my cycle. And that's something that Leo taught me. So the whole sleep thing, stress management, I was working like all hours. And I think Leo just put everything into perspective. So not only was he telling me to up my food, we were working with my diet, but also like the stress maintenance was a massive part of it. So as soon as I started implementing the stress like relaxation techniques, that then made me realize that it wasn't just the nutrition side of things. The biggest thing for me was training. So I was kind of obsessed with training and probably wasn't eating enough alongside that. So we dropped a lot of my training, stopped doing HIIT, and just kept things more like weight-based. Yeah.
Cool. You're being very modest, so do you mind if I add a couple of things to that?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So you also obviously a qualified lawyer, right? That's what you were studying at university, was law. So obviously that's stressful and a lot of hours and expensive. So then you were also modeling lots, and then you were also working as a waitress, right? Which was late nights, which impacted sleep, was a bit stressful, and was a lot of steps. So one key thing for us when we were looking at the training side of it, unfortunately, was because steps kind of had to be so high. It's not like you can tell your client, just stop working. Steps were like crazy, crazy high, and the shifts impacted sleep. That unfortunately meant that we did have to really bring training volume and intensity down, and we'll get to like what we did with the plan a little bit more, but that's why it's so important to assess that like stress bucket kind of analogy that we looked at in the pre-course lesson and spoke about on Monday, because there are some parts of your client's life that just might not be able to change, in like that was it for Victoria. And unfortunately, as much as she loved in particular spin classes, like we just couldn't really do HIIT and spin classes and weight train to failure because the prerequisites of sleep weren't there and steps had to be really, really high.
I think actually that's I underestimated like the impact of my steps. So I kind of normalized that doing that amount of steps every day. And then it wasn't until we started working together that I realized that I was probably like exceeding like my calorie deficit because of the amount of steps I was doing. That's something that, I probably normalized. So hadn't really become aware of the impact of so many steps until you kind of discussed that with me.
Yeah, awesome. So this is why, like, I feel like the education side of it with a client, or at least like informing them, it doesn't have to be educational. And for the sake of being pedantic, the difference there, in my opinion, is maybe just like how much you kind of bore them with the education versus just lightly informing, right? But Victoria was a great client in the sense that she was like, this is a real problem and I want to fix it. So the more education, kind of the better, which obviously is great if you're the coach. But this is why those first like few calls, in my opinion, are so important. And if you're not doing calls with online clients, I'd really recommend it, even if it's just at the start, because you can use that screen share and you can really use things as we spoke about in week one, like the stress bucket analogy, and you can actually work through these moving parts with clients and highlight and explain the importance, because if they don't understand why certain things matter or why certain things are important, they're not obviously going to, you know, communicate them with you. They're not going to check in on them. They might not buy into and be consistent on doing something or not doing something if they don't understand the importance of it. So like for Victoria, right from the start, I wanted it to be pretty educational because there was a lot of moving parts. There was the stress of like doing 3 things like university, working, modeling, and then there's the stress on the body from training, there's the stress from lack of sleep, there's the stress from the micronutrient deficiencies, there's the physiological stressors, which we'll get to, which we see in her blood work. So there were so many components that came together and obviously all have a knock-on effect, including previous antibiotics and previous birth control. So it's important for the client to understand that, is the point I'm getting at there. So if you're not using like 1 or 2 calls, even at least just at the start with your online clients, and even in person, because in person, when you're training someone one-on-one, that's really not the environment to like, you can't really explain that in their rest period, right? It's not really the right environment. So whether you do it in person or whether you do it on a call, I don't think really matters, but taking that extra time up front in the first week or 2 to really explain what's going on and what you need to do is really, really valuable, because Victoria's been really consistent for months and months and months and months and months, as are like the vast majority of my clients. And there's no magic to that, but a lot of coaches struggle with getting their clients consistent, doing the work and checking in. And I think that you're just not setting the precedent right from day one on the importance of all of it, basically. The importance of whatever the moving parts are and educating them on that. And then the importance of having that data, whether you use that word or not, which obviously comes with checking in. And you'll see how awesome Victoria was at checking in a few slides time as well. Anything you want to add into that, Victoria?
Yeah, I think the education. So there's like 3 things that I learned mainly from like the way that you coached me.
Is that
was
it?
No, but like my 3 big takeaways.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
So education, I think understanding stress as like a whole. So when I first thought of stress, I thought, oh, my university degree is the most stressful thing in my life. And when we sat down and kind of spoke about the other stresses, I realized that the university degree probably wasn't. So like we've discussed before, the things like steps, other work, lack of sleep, actually having management techniques to reduce the stress. I never understood how many parts of stress there was. So I think that was, yeah, that's really valuable. The second thing was perspective. So when you put it all into perspective and you're like, okay, so you kind of laid everything out and was like, you're eating this many calories, you're losing this, you're burning this many calories, and then you're left with this. And I think the situation, I felt so much stress from all the different like parts of my life that it took you to be really quite honest and brutal at times and just be like really lay it out. I think as a client, everything just seemed so much, and at times even having a coach felt quite overwhelming. So someone to say you need to do this every week, you have to be checking in, that was even more stressful. But you made it quite simple, so you gave lots of different forms that kind of broke it down so easily that made it more manageable. And yeah, I think again the third thing is mindset, but in like just basically saying like this, you've lost your menstrual cycle, and then looking forward to saying, if you carry on this way, this could affect your chances of reproducing in the future. For example, we discussed like the bigger picture when you're wanting to lose weight, like maintain a certain body shape or stay at a certain weight. It's so that you're so narrow-minded and focused on that one thing that it kind of took you to take a step back and say, if you carry on this way, you are not going to be able to do this, this, and this. And showed me like the bigger impact that could have on my life. And that was the turning point for me to kind of accept that I needed to reverse diet or up my calories. So I think that, yeah, those were like the 3 valuable things, if I could say as a client, to take away.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I'll add to that when we're talking about our plan and the check-ins. So yeah, thank you very much for that. The main one there is like there was a lot of calls and there was a lot of voice notes. I think a lot of coaches get quite frustrated if their clients like maybe don't get it straight away. But when you're literally undoing years worth of programming, sometimes that requires repetition to like change those thought patterns, to change those beliefs, which is also why you need to charge a lot of money. It might seem £200 might seem a lot per month, you know, to communicate initially to your clients, but if I'm on the phone with Victoria and sending her voice notes, etc., it very quickly becomes not that much of a daily rate, right? So I think instantly there's this disconnect with a lot of coaches that are massively undercharging per month for the online coaching aspect of it. And then because they feel maybe a bit resentful of how much they're charging, they don't kind of want to be going above and beyond with the education and the communication. And then you kind of have that disconnect where it's kind of your fault because you've signed the client up at a price point, which then you don't feel like warrants you doing all of this stuff, which is quite often needed, because you're not going to get someone to do the opposite of what they want to do and what they believe is right with just telling them once. It normally is going to require repetition, even if something serious has happened to them, like losing the menstrual cycle, and they know, in this case Victoria knew she wanted it back, but it still takes repetition to undo all those beliefs and kind of all that programming. So make sure you're charging a monthly rate that warrants the time and the communication and the education to make sure that happens. And then, as Victoria said, sometimes all of this can seem more confusing, more complicated, more stressful, more overwhelming, which obviously can often be counterproductive. So you've got to choose your battles with the amount of information and the amount of boxes you tick. But at the same time, when something's often gone quite badly, a small, like implementing one habit like the precision nutrition approach, that can be great. But if Victoria's lost her menstrual cycle and I go in week 1, don't worry about it, just hit your water target. That is not going to move the needle and change direction of a problem that's going so far in regression so quickly. Just hitting a water target in week 1 isn't going to make a difference. So often with clients, you have to unfortunately do it quite a lot straight off the bat to stop that regression happening and then move them into progress, right? Like if you just think of physics and you think of force moving in one direction, it doesn't require a small amount of effort to stop that force. It requires a lot to stop that force and change the direction it's traveling in. But at the same time, that can be counterproductive if it's overwhelming or stressful, which requires a lot of skill and experience as a coach to match that client where they're at. But again, that does take time on calls and on voice notes and on WhatsApp. So you have to be charging a rate that's obviously worth your time to do that. So yeah, does anyone have any other questions for now? Any thoughts on that? Any questions on that? So the starting weight, just bear this in mind for now, was 9 stone 4, 59.6 kilograms or 131 pounds. And if you're thinking that doesn't sound that light, how tall are you again, Victoria?
5'11".
Yeah, so obviously a bit tall, and as we said, like really love training, trains hard, knew how to train hard, and lots of steps. So yeah, that weight may not seem too low at first, but just bear all of that in mind. So okay, let's get into a little bit of the diagnosis side of amenorrhea. So as always, if I'm going too fast, let me know. If you've got questions, let me know. So amenorrhea just means loss of the menstrual cycle, but obviously that can happen for various reasons. For example, amenorrhea could be a effect of PCOS. So you can have PCOS and then that may result in you losing your menstrual cycle. So here what we have is typically known as HA or sometimes FHA. So functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, okay, which just means that it originates in the hypothalamus. So as we've looked at already, that hypothalamus is the part of the brain that sits in the limbic system, and it is the same starting point for both the nervous system and the endocrine system, which is subsequently why we have such a large impact of stress on our hormones, and specifically here, loss of the menstrual cycle, right? So point 1, you can lose your menstrual cycle for different causes of amenorrhea, but when we're talking about over dieting, over stressed, over exercising, too lean, or typically a combination of them because they're not mutually exclusive, right? That's then called functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. What your doctor should typically do, and Victoria told me today that her doctor's just done this, is you should rule out more serious causes of loss of the menstrual cycle. For example, one of them might be a tumor on your pituitary gland. So that could cause amenorrhea because you now don't have the signaling coming down from the pituitary gland, right? And we'll look at that a bit more in a second. So stuff like that should be done right at the start. And more serious consequences, viruses, illnesses, a tumor on the pituitary gland, all of that should be ruled out by a medical professional at the start, which it kind of wasn't. But the reason I didn't really think that was too much of a problem is you can normally pretty safely say if it's FHA or if it's amenorrhea for different reasons. So bearing in mind everything Victoria just said, after having a good conversation with her, looking at body fat percentage, looking at output, looking at hours she was working, looking at stress, looking at sleep, looking at calorie intake, you can 99% say, 99.9% say with certainty, she has got amenorrhea because of all of this stuff here, right? Because all of those reasons, which means it's pretty safe to say it is functional hypothalamic amenorrhea. She probably hasn't lost her menstrual cycle because she's got a tumor on her pituitary gland, because that's a lot less likely, and we've assessed her position, right? Although, of course, just to be sure and to cover yourself, you really should work with the client's medical professional, and they should be ruling out all the other possibilities. Unfortunately, that wasn't done, but we've got the cycle back now. So, yeah. Any questions on the difference between specifically FHA and amenorrhea in general? So, when we're looking at amenorrhea, so loss of the cycle regardless of the root cause, we're going to have a drop in estrogen of around 33%, and progesterone will be around 10% of normal levels. Okay, so there's a lot less progesterone. Anyone have any ideas why progesterone levels are going to drop significantly more than estrogen? And can anyone remember the name of the hypothalamic hormone that the hypothalamus releases when we're talking about the reproductive axis? So filling in the dots here. Does anyone have any thoughts or answers to those two questions? So the hypothalamic hormone, when we're talking about the reproductive axis, was that GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay, which was this little gap here. We'll look at that again on the axis in a second. I just didn't want to give you the answer. The reason progesterone plummets significantly more than estrogen is, remember that the majority of progesterone is produced from the corpus luteum. We've touched on that a tiny bit, but that's really going to be Monday's lesson when we look at the menstrual cycle. So basically, progesterone only really increases and surges in the second half of the menstrual cycle, the luteal phase. So it surges as a result of ovulation occurring. If we don't have a menstrual cycle, ovulation hasn't occurred, right? That makes sense to everyone. And subsequently, no ovulation, no release of the egg, and then the part of the egg, the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone, obviously that's what makes it surge in the second half of the cycle. So because we now don't have ovulation occurring, no egg is released, which is what ovulation is, we don't have that surge in progesterone, okay? So we now only have a very, very small amount, which is the amount produced in the theca cells of the ovaries. So this is at most what we're going to see, 33% of the available estrogen, 10% of the normal progesterone, because both of those are also produced in the adrenals, remember, as well. So we're going to have a little bit of those probably, but it could even be lower, okay, depending on how stressed, how chronically stressed the client is. But the point is that the exact percentage doesn't really matter because there is no average client, right? We're working with an individual. But the point here is significantly less. So now we have that low estrogen and that low progesterone state, which is going to be typical of someone going through menopause, right? So we might see symptoms here like night sweats. We're going to see issues with losing muscle tissue, issues potentially with bone density, issues with emotional instability, all of that stuff that comes with low estrogen and low progesterone. And that really is the point of Monday's lesson, which is why I'm not really going into it too much here on the slides. So don't worry, because Monday's lesson is the menstrual cycle. So the release of luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone also does not occur, or will occur very minimally. So remember, we've got the hypothalamus that releases GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. LH and FSH are the gonadotropin hormones. So that then talks to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland releases the LH and the FSH. So obviously this isn't occurring, or it's really, really affected. It was very minimal. So in the case of Victoria, LH was at 0.1. So there was an LH signal, but it just ridiculously minimal. And subsequently, the follicle never matures, okay, because follicular stimulating hormone is what matures the follicles. One of them is chosen, that is then the Graafian follicle. It releases its egg. That process is called ovulation, etc., right? I'll leave this on here for a second if anyone wants notes. Again, it's always great to hear things lots of times, so I think repetition is important. So it's great to touch on this now, but we'll look at the menstrual cycle again Monday, so don't worry too much about that right now. But the point is, no signaling, no hormones. Pretty simple. Okay, let's look at that on the axis. Oh, where's the axis? Let me end this. Let me do the next couple slides, then I'll open up one of our other lessons and show you that again on the axis. So here, I think this is a really important point because a lot of people just associate a menstrual cycle with the ability to reproduce, to get pregnant, right? And I mean, that is what the menstrual cycle is. The main event of the menstrual cycle, so to speak, is ovulation. That is the whole point of the menstrual cycle. The whole point of ovulation is getting pregnant. However, even if the client doesn't care about getting pregnant right now, or even ever, we still need to care about the menstrual cycle because the menstrual cycle means we are having the production of estrogen and progesterone. And they are important for many other reasons, as we've already kind of touched on a little bit. So we need to understand that, so that if the client goes, yeah, I don't have a cycle, but I don't really care because whatever, I don't want to get pregnant right now, we can say to them, no, this is still a problem for other reasons. Okay, most notably muscle mass, bone density, and emotional kind of stability. And here is just a conclusion of the meta-analysis looking at the research on FSH and the effect that that has on females. Okay, so again, important to kind of know that, so that if that comes up as a you know, a reply from your clients, oh, but I don't care about it, you can go, here's why we do need to care about it. Okay, just so you've got that bit of information. So yes, Miles.
What study is it?
Linked at the end, mate. It's on the last slide. There's a link. Okay, so moving into the bloods. So here, bear with me on the bloods because I don't really think the point of this right now is necessarily to teach you blood work analysis. That's probably kind of out of the scope of this course in general, but it is good to have a base understanding of what some of these markers would mean. So I'm going to get into it a little bit. And also I have uploaded into the Google Drive the blood work analysis, what's the right word? I guess worksheet, if you want for a better term, that I got on the course that I did. So you can look at every blood marker, you can look at the ranges, and you can look at what that could mean. I've uploaded that into the drive from the course that I've done. Okay, so don't worry about that too much here. I just kind of want to paint the picture for you of how we ideally need to try and figure out a bit more precisely what the root cause of the client losing their menstrual cycle might be. And after this, Victoria, I'll get you to add to this a little bit if you want, around like why you feel like some of these numbers might be here. So just quickly, important to note is that Victoria had done these bloods and then came to me. So there could have been a couple of other markers that I would have liked to have seen if she had come to me and then I'd got her to do bloods, and if she was doing them privately. Obviously private bloods aren't cheap, and Victoria just finished uni. So all bloods were done through the NHS, which wasn't ideal in terms of getting all of the markers done. It wasn't ideal in terms of arguing with her doctor to get the bloody results. It wasn't ideal in terms of frequency and a bunch of other stuff. So there are a couple of things here that like ideally would have been done a bit differently if you were having your clients do them privately. And I'll obviously tell you what those are as we go through. But the first one is just actually some other markers. So what would have been great would have been some other liver markers, some other thyroid markers, etc. But we got what we had when Victoria came to me. So let me talk you through them. So The first one is LH, or luteinizing hormone. You really don't need to necessarily see that on a blood test to know that it's going to be low if they don't have a menstrual cycle, right? Because the loss of menstrual cycle is an end result of that signaling. So you know that's going to be low. So hers was 0.1 or 0.2. So the simple what we need to do for that is, as we've already touched on, more food, less stress, and carbs. And we'll talk a bit about carbs specifically in luteinizing hormone a little bit later, okay? If you're thinking this is very bullet point and basic, it is. Me and Victoria had a call, like maybe the same day I sent this email, maybe the next day. So this was just a real kind of brief reply to her before we went through it on a call. So the next marker is globulin, which is a protein marker. It was low. So what that means is that we're potentially just having not enough protein, or we're potentially having an absorption issue, right? I'm sure you've all heard the saying, you are not what you eat, but you are obviously what you eat, what you absorb, and then what you don't excrete as well, right? So when we're looking at protein markers or mineral markers, it isn't as simple as just saying you need to get more of those in. We might have an issue with absorption and uptake and utilization, right? So what we might have here is a state of intestinal permeability, which is affecting that absorption. And I'll explain what that is a little bit more in a couple of slides' time. But for now, the point is that it's potentially showing low protein intake and or issues with absorption. Now, again, if you think back to the individual in front of you and the person that you're working with, you can obviously, get a feel for what one that might be based on other symptoms and based on what they're eating. So for Victoria, it probably was both, based on some other symptoms of digestive issues and the fact that she wasn't eating much and also wasn't eating much protein, which is really simple to confirm. You just kind of ask the client, maybe keep a food diary, right? So you're kind of painting this picture of the person in front of you by pulling together their other symptoms, their blood markers, their current situation, previous medications. So the two previous medications that are relevant to note here are birth control and antibiotics, which at a simple to explain level, I think we all know both of those can cause issues with the gut microbiome, and they can both cause issues with intestinal permeability. Now, exactly how much, the severity of that and the mechanisms of that are being debated right now by people that are significantly smarter than me with PhDs are debating exactly how that may or may not occur. But the point is, for now, before we look at gut health more in week 5, is just to understand that both birth control and antibiotics are not ideal for your digestive system and are potentially going to cause issues. And again, we can see that here with these multiple markers of protein and of, in this case, potassium and zinc, which are low. So that's showing she's probably not getting enough in, and or there's a digestive issue affecting the absorption and uptake of those protein/nutrients, right? What we also have here is ESR, which is a full body inflammatory marker. So it doesn't show us specifically where the inflammation might be, but it's high. So this kind of now ties into the next thing, okay? Is inflammation of the intestines, is this leaky gut intestinal permeability thing maybe a problem? Potentially, right? We have an inflammatory marker that's high. Next, we have urea, which is a waste product of protein, and this is low. So if someone was overeating protein, which is is something you'll often see in bodybuilding clients, sometimes urea will actually be high because you're potentially not going to use all of that protein that you're consuming. So urea might actually be high in some clients, if you have a comp prep client do bloods. Hers was low. So again, this shows probable insufficient protein intake and or inability to absorb it and utilize it properly, okay? And then I've said to her here, this also explains the low globulin. So we're starting to tie it all together, right? Total protein, which is a combination of a few markers, which in itself doesn't mean too much. It's better to see them individually. Again, it's low. Potassium, low. Creatine, okay, which is a marker of protein synthesis. Typically, you would see this high and elevated in people that are weight training, lots. So this is why you might see sometimes when you're buying your bloods through Medichecks or whatever, it will say, don't train for 2 days before you have your bloods done. you know, don't worry about that. It really doesn't matter if this marker is elevated. It just shows that you're training. But again, here it's low, even though Victoria was training. And lastly, we have a precursor here for zinc. And again, it's really, really low. So again, here we've potentially got issues of intake and or the utilization, absorption first, I should say, sorry, absorption and utilization, right? So this ties into obviously under-eating in general, and it's making me think potentially there are some digestive problems, right? And what confirms that is the amount of markers and the consistency of markers, both nutrient-wise and inflammation-wise, the fact that there was previous antibiotics and birth control, and here some other symptoms included bloating and inconsistent and unhealthy stools, which obviously tells us a digestive problem, right? So we're starting to put all of this together. Last but not least, a full blood count was done. And within our white blood cells, we can now look at the following. So all of these individual types of white blood cells make up our innate immune system. So we have two branches of our immune system, our innate and our adaptive. So the innate immune system is the first responders. So they don't change, they're not adaptive, okay? That's just we're dealing with the inflammation in the intestines, or we're dealing with a cut, okay? Whatever it might be, they're our first responders. Our adaptive immune system adapts over time to the environment. So I'm not going to really pretend to understand how vaccines work, but that's how vaccines work. They expose you to a little bit of it, and your adaptive immune system goes, okay, I need to deal with that. And now, therefore, it is adapted and understands that obviously better. If you catch the virus next time, it's already been exposed and has adapted to that input, right? But here, anyway, white blood cells, we're looking at our innate immune system. So in total, they added up to 2.7, okay? And it should be at least 4. And then we can view the individual different types of cells which have different roles. And again, we're seeing here, they're all low, okay, at an individual level. So what this shows is the immune system is currently fighting something and has been fighting it a long time and is losing and therefore is chronically low, or it was fighting something, it's won and has now crashed. So what you'll see when you look at white blood cells on a blood test is they'll either obviously be in range, which is great, or if there's a problem, you'll either see them really elevated or you'll see them really low. So I had another client, for example, Tiff, she'd lost her menstrual cycle, but all of it was a lot more severe, like the stress and the under-eating had all been quite severe, and it had all kind of only been about 2 months, okay? So all of this stuff was going wrong for her, kind of similar to Victoria, but just over a 2-month time frame. And she had a probable H. pylori infection as well, which is really common out here in Thailand, where this client was. And she never paid for the stool test to confirm, but based on symptoms, I was like, I think you've got a H. pylori infection. So I've got her to do this test, and hers were off the chart. Her total was 28 off the top of my head. So it's the exact same kind of problem as Victoria. The difference is just when we tested. So we tested a lot quicker to the problem starting for this client, Tiff. And what that meant was we caught it in a state where the immune system was obviously massively upregulated and fighting and dealing with that. Whereas here in Victoria, this test was done quite a few months and even years after these problems building up. And that meant that often what happens is the immune system kind of just go, we can't really deal with this anymore. And it actually kind of crashes for a while because it's been upregulated for so long. So unless there is a specific problem that might be causing that, so, okay, cool, you've just had dengue fever and you're recovering from that, or you've just had malaria and you're recovering from that. Okay, that tells us why the immune system might be elevated, or if you're past it and recovering from it, crashed, right? But if there isn't, it's another indication that maybe what the immune system is fighting is this intestinal permeability problem that we're kind of talking about. So that's just another reason why I think that's going on. So we've got various markers of issues with absorption and uptake. Last slide, we've got innate immune system is really, really low and compromised, and we've got some symptoms, okay? Anything you want to add there, Victoria, to like why that stuff might have happened, or just anything you want to add to any of that about your bloods?
I think you did a really good job of like simplifying it. I found the whole blood thing really overwhelming. Like the whole experience of being told to go and get bloods to explain something that was already really scary. And then when I got them back, I had no clue. And the doctor had no clue either. They told me, I think you remember, they told me that all that was normal. So every time I rang up for my bloods, they said, oh no, they're normal. And then I sent them to Leo, and Leo was like, they are not normal, and explained that how the doctor's idea of normal is obviously completely different to what in reality is normal. So I remember they've never told me that my bloods were wrong at all. Every time I had bloods done, they said that they were normal or like acceptable. I think they said satisfactory. So I think the main thing was like your ability to understand that they weren't, and then be quite honest and say they're not normal and this is what we need to do about it.
Cool, thanks for adding that. Yeah, your doctor had no clue, which is sad. It's really sad, like when something's pretty serious in a way. The loss of the menstrual cycle is pretty serious. When something like that has happened and they're still telling you your bloods are fine, like that really pisses me off quite a lot, to be honest, because it's just you're just obviously not fine. Like, how can luteinizing hormone at 0.1 and no menstrual cycle be fine? Like, I can't fathom why there'd be an answer to that. And I'm not more educated than a doctor. I'm not more experienced than a doctor. I spent 8 years in medical school. So like, how is this still happening? I just really don't get it. And this isn't a one-off. Like, Victoria is one of many clients I've had with this exact same back and forwards situation and problem. So yeah, it's really quite sad. And what's sadder is often the solution is birth control, because that will regulate your hormones, which I think everyone in here understands that that's not how birth control, that's not how the oral contraceptive pill works. It stops the signaling from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, and the pituitary to the ovaries. Just like if a guy would do a testosterone cycle, you stop producing your own testosterone because you don't need it. You're taking in a surplus of an exogenous amount. So your body shuts down your own supply to try and offset the fact that you are injecting testosterone. When you're taking the synthetic equivalent of estrogen and progesterone, the exact same thing happens. That signaling process stops occurring because you're taking it, you're having it coming in. So your body stops your own production to try and balance that out. So it doesn't regulate your hormones at all. It's not even like, oh, let's use this word so the client understands. It's not even like dumbing it down. It's just point blank wrong, and potentially quite dangerous, because you now have a client that thinks maybe their menstrual cycle is back to normal, but it's obviously not, and it's not at all. And you're not fixing the underlying problem. If anything, you're making the underlying problem worse, because you've maybe got a false sense of security around the fact that the problem's gone now, which therefore doesn't highlight the importance of needing to work on, for example, in Victoria's case, just about everything, right? Or whatever it might be for that client. So if anything, the problem's only going to get worse over time. Health isn't stagnant. Health does not stay in homeostasis. It typically either regresses or progresses. It can, if you're healthy and you're not doing anything to try and improve it, and you're not doing anything to make it worse, sure, it will balance out. But if your health is in a state of regression, it will typically only continue to get worse, right? So yeah, it's super sad, the whole doctor situation, which is why having at least a basic understanding of bloods, like there's people that can read bloods and understand it way better than me, way more, and teach courses on it. I wouldn't want to try and teach a whole course on reading blood work, but having at least a fairly basic understanding of it, which isn't really that hard to do. Like, you dedicate 4 or 5 months to bloods, you can really get it. That can make a massive difference for the client, because without those bloods, it would have been really hard for me to communicate to Victoria, this is where you're at, this is why there's a problem, and this is what we need to do. Because I'm just like telling her there's a problem, please believe me. Whereas if I'm looking at her bloods and the numbers are there, then it's not me telling her, the bloods are telling her. And that makes a massive difference in terms of getting that buy-in, that trust, that rapport, and ultimately the client kind of doing the work, right? It also lets you see what that root cause might be, again, a bit more specifically. So for her, there may have been absolutely no inflammatory markers, no problems with the immune system. In which case, if I had just told her, oh, sounds like intestinal permeability, let's run a leaky gut protocol, it would have been an additional stressor for her, an additional supplement cost, etc., that was just completely unnecessary, which is obviously never what we want. You have to really pick your battles with what you're asking the client to do, right? So having someone consider doing all the stuff I'm about to explain a little bit off, you really need to have that ideally come from a place of it being personalized. So just like I said on Monday, if you think you have a client with mitochondrial dysfunction and you're explaining to them, hey, we really need to do X, Y, and Z, if you can explain to them, this is why we're doing it based on your symptoms and your issues, you will have a consistent adherent client. If you just tell them, please remove gluten, do breath work, it's good for you, please meditate, it's good for you, the client's probably going to do none of it because you're not able to explain it from a personalized place of where they are at, right? Does that make sense?
I think I'd actually like to add something there, as like from a client's point of view, this stuff's probably like you guys understand it, but I had no idea. And even like having some slight understanding now of the blood work and the importance of it in like my problem was a massive turning point. I have loads of friends in a similar position that still believe the doctor when they've given them birth control. And I've tried explaining it to my friends and saying, look, you need to look into this, this, and this, but they don't have the understanding that of the impact of the pill. So they believe the doctor and they think, oh yeah, it's solving the problem. They kept saying to me, just go on a pill, and I refused to do that because I knew that I wanted to sort the underlying root cause. But I think the fact that you had the education to explain to me that the pill isn't going to solve this was a massive turning point in my journey.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, that's one extra really great point, is that if you're kind of going to go against your client's doctor, you do need to be pretty well informed and confident, because if the client has a choice between believing their personal trainer or their doctor, you know, that's a no-brainer 99% of the time. So you have to be pretty well educated and informed, back up what you're saying. Like I was sending Victoria studies and links, and I do that a lot. I do that a lot to clients, and I'll say to them, please forward this to your doctor. I don't care. Forward it to your doctor. I want your doctor to read this. Tell your doctor to email me. Like, please do. Like, do you know what I mean? But also on that as well, you need to not be like confrontational, because if I'm just like to Victoria, your doctor's a dickhead, here's why he's wrong. Often, like, the client might have maybe a relationship with that doctor. They've maybe seen them for years. Maybe they trust them. Like, that might actually be really counterproductive in pushing the client away. Now, I did actually train Victoria like 5 years ago before all of this, when she came back to my hometown for summer from uni, and we did some one-on-one sessions for like a couple of months. Got some mutual friends. So like there was probably an increased amount of trust and relationship there, which obviously helped. But also me not just being like, your doctor's wrong and here's why, but kind of meeting that doctor where they're at a little bit, explaining the doctor's standpoint, why sometimes maybe they would say that or feel like that, but kind of here's why it's wrong, and just trying to be empathetic with that instead of being confrontational will go a long way. Because if you've got a client that doesn't really know you, they follow you on Instagram, they sign up, you jump on a call, and you're basically telling them that their doctor's wrong, you can see why that might be problematic and might not go down too well. So one way that I address that specifically with birth control is, because that can be a sensitive topic, you might not be on it for reproductive reasons, you might not want to hear it from a male, and you might not want to hear it from someone that's not a doctor. So I have 3 articles that are all written by Dr. Lara Bryden, who I really, really like, explaining how birth control actually works and explaining potentially the consequences and why it's not going to fix your root causes. Client tells me they're on birth control. I say to them, I will never ask you about this again if you don't want me to. Please read these 3 articles. If you would like to have a conversation about that afterwards, let me know. I've never once had a client read those articles and tell me, yep, I'm 100% happy on birth control still. I don't want to talk to you about it because you're a guy and not a doctor. They always go, oh my God, please can we speak about this? Even if they stay on it because it's the right decision for them, which is fine. Even if they stay on it, it's coming from now, at least they're doing it from a place of being informed and educated, right? And there's some stuff we need to do to support them being on it, such as it causes micronutrient deficiencies. But more often than not, they go, can you support me in coming off? And I go, well, maybe let's have a chat about that. But by sending them articles that are written by a doctor and a female and telling them that they don't have to speak to me about this if they don't want to. Here's the initial information. Please come back to me if you want. In my opinion, obviously, I feel like that's a good way of going about it. Okay. So I hope that helped some of you with some practical application of working with doctors. Does anyone have any questions so far before I explain what intestinal permeability is? No, we good? Miles, you good? That all makes sense so far? Wonderful, mate. Please stop me at any time. So we're going to get into this a lot more in week 5, but what I want to just quickly explain here is a couple of things. This will often be bashed in the medical community because there is no quantifiable diagnosis and there is no proper testing. Okay. PS, credit to Muscle Nerds for this graph. Although actually this wasn't originally from Muscle Nerds. They just stuck their logo on it when I did their course 5 years ago. But anyway, so if you follow certain medical professionals that bash leaky gut, sure, we definitely need to be cautious of some of these like functional doctors that have a supplement line themselves and, you know, are making money off recommending literally 20+ supplements for a diagnosis that may or may not be there. So please remember when I'm saying this, this is coming from a place of me looking at Victoria's bloods, Victoria's symptoms, and some potential root causes, other root causes that may affect intestinal permeability, such as birth control and antibiotics. So intestinal permeability is not black or white. You've got it or you've not. It's a continuum of how damaged or how permeable your intestinal lining is. So your intestinal lining looks like this. They're super tight junctions and they go like that, right? So there's a massive surface area to maximize A, the transit time, and B, the surface area, meaning the uptake of obviously what food's broken down into. So our fuel substrates, nutrients, etc. Maximize the surface area and therefore the contact to uptake that. Now, when we have this going on here, okay, we have potentially some gaps. And now whole pieces of food and some other stuff can enter the bloodstream, okay? This is where people often develop food intolerances. It is not the food, it is the fact that your body should not be able to recognize that food. It should be fully digested. And because it's entering the bloodstream before it's fully digested, the body is attacking it like a foreign invader, and we now get an immune response, okay? We might get specific immune responses. So for me, last year, had SIBO, I was getting really bad histamine responses. So histamine's an innate immune response. I couldn't go outside in the heat and sweat without coming up in a red rash in my skin and getting really itchy. Luckily for me, I knew exactly what that was. So when that started happening, I could do something about it. But most people wouldn't bring that back to their intestines, right? Again, we'll look at that more in week 5. But what I want to show you here is the 5 kind of knock-on effects or symptoms that might happen. And let's put that in the specific context of Victoria, right? So here we're going to have issues with micronutrient absorption. That was a tick for Victoria, right? Victoria has not developed an autoimmune disease, but we were having immune response issues. Food intolerances. Victoria was having some intolerances and some issues to certain foods. Just remind me quickly, Victoria, were you having brain fog, migraines, headaches, any cognitive issues?
Not really.
Yeah, no, I didn't think so. So no issues with stuff crossing the blood-brain barrier, although that can happen. Full body inflammation, yeah, there was an inflammatory marker that was high, right? So tick, tick, cross, tick, 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 cross, tick, okay, for Victoria. So this is what intestinal permeability is. So what do we do about it? The very quick version is, and we'll look at this more in week 5, is we need to remove anything that might be causing this, if possible, which is typically for people more likely going to be your processed sugar, your alcohol, etc., etc. In Victoria, it was less of that, and it was more just a duration of this stress over time. So it's removing whatever's causing it, and we'll look at some supplements that can support the intestinal lining. But the short answer is going to be your collagen, protein in general, zinc, and L-glutamine. And again, if you want to look at the slides for week 5, then you can, because all the slides are already in the Google Drive ahead of time. Okay, so that's the short version of that. And I know I'm going over that quickly, but that's because this is just part of the problem for Victoria, and primarily what we're looking at here is loss of the menstrual cycle. So this is the same slide from Monday that you might remember. And I said that understanding this can help with obviously our decision making around the order of importance, right? So what we've got here, loss of the menstrual cycle, is right at the top of this pyramid. Yeah, it's obviously sex hormone related. So what we have here for Victoria is, was there stress? I won't obviously keep repeating myself. You all know all of the different stresses that were there. Were there issues with nutrition? Yes. Were there issues with sleep? Yes. Were there issues with the digestive system? Yes. Okay. Were there any issues with the liver? Don't know for definite. There was only 2 liver markers done, but they were both fine. There was no symptoms of issues with the liver. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? Why would there be? It's not like we're overeating or drinking lots of alcohol. So there shouldn't be a problem there. But before we even worry about any potential issues with thyroid, insulin, blood sugar markers, adrenal glands, specifically the sex hormones, there is so much stuff we need to address down here. That's really where we need to start, right? In terms of order of importance, in terms of like daily boxes that you're getting the client to tick, and potentially supplements. Does that concept make sense to anyone? Has anyone got any questions so far? Cool. Remember, you'll have the slides to take notes from, and we'll delve into each of these sections more in the relevant weeks. So a few quick extra thoughts on blood tests, because blood tests can not really be that valuable. A lot of the time, one of the problems we'll see is you'll go to the doctor, you've lost your menstrual cycle, or you've got suspected PCOS or whatever it is. They'll only test the sex hormones. That doesn't tell us anything, really. If you've lost your menstrual cycle, I can tell you where your sex hormones will be on a blood test. Pretty non-existent. Like what value does that add? Like literally nothing. So you need to test ideally everything so you can see what the root cause might be. Is it the immune system? Is it the liver? Is it the gut? Is it thyroid? Is it insulin, etc.? You need to test everything. Within reason, the more the better. Also remember that blood shots only show a snapshot in time. So they might appear okay. Your doctor might be like, oh yeah, they're in range. But if you've done them 2 months earlier, they might have been better. And 2 months earlier, they might have been better again. So the trend might be they're getting worse, but that snapshot in time that you have captured might still be just in range. But you might still be experiencing symptoms because they are getting worse. And if you do them 2 months later, oh, okay, yeah, now we're sorry to tell you, your bloods are out of range. Okay, but you might have been experiencing symptoms and problems before that due to the fact that they are regressing, but they might have been regressing from a normal range still but worse, a normal range still but worse, out of range, right? So you have to understand that even if the bloods come back okay, that is only a snapshot in time. That does not mean regression is not happening. As we looked at Monday when we briefly looked at the Dutch test, it also doesn't tell us where the sex hormones and cortisol, what pathways they might be getting pushed down, right? What conversions might be happening. So ideally within reason, the more frequent bloods, the better if possible, because now we can paint those trends over time of what we're doing, what is the input, and what effect has that had on the bloods. We still need to consider and correlate all of this with symptoms. Okay, so the plan. Very simply and quickly, the plan was fairly straightforward. It was more food, less stress, less training, specifically addressing the symptoms of low stomach acid. And I think you all know, but if I go over this too quickly, please let me know, but you can't optimally digest food when you're in fight or flight. Okay, we looked at that a bit in the pre-course lesson, but if I've glossed over that too quickly, please let me know. So all of these stress management techniques are also super important to try and optimize digestion. And remember, for Victoria, it wasn't just a case of not eating enough. We also had some symptoms of low stomach acids, and we probably had this intestinal permeability. So not only did we need to eat more and ensure sufficient protein, sufficient fats, sufficient carbs, sufficient micronutrients, we also needed to optimize stress to optimize digestion. Specifically, there's some stuff we can do here, bitters and organic apple cider vinegar to stimulate stomach acid production, okay, as well. So you can implement that if relevant with clients. And then here are the supplements that we used post antibiotics, post birth control, and for the intestinal permeability. Now, gluten is obviously a massive kind of controversial point. I do think if the client appears to be having food reactions, if inflammation's high, if there's a lot of all of these problems that we've spoke about, considering it is quite easy to remove, it's probably not a bad idea to play it safe and temporarily kind of run through an elimination diet where gluten and wheat is removed, and then you try and reintroduce it at a later date when the immune system is back in range and the intestinal lining is permeable again, so that we're not having that inflammatory effect. Now, a lot of people are going to have very different opinions on that. It's not something I would want a client to do unnecessarily because it is an additional stressor and consideration. But in this instance, based on all of the information that we've spoke about, I did think it would most probably, but you can never say for definite, be a good idea to remove at least initially, okay? So that is a very brief overview of the plan. Some specifics. We went to 1740 calories roughly, 120 protein, 120 carb, 60 fat. Now that's still a bit low, but remember that often when you try and have a client up their food, they will struggle with appetite. They will struggle with the psychology of eating more. They will struggle with the fact that that might cause some weight gain from obviously increased water retention, increased carbohydrate storage as glycogen. So ideally, sure, you make a big jump and you just get back to a sufficient amount at maintenance. But if you have to get there in 1 or 2 jumps to ensure that the client is happy, that's probably not the end of the world. Because steps had to stay really high, as we spoke about, we kind of focused on just trying to train 3 times a week. And we didn't use HIIT and spin classes, it was more moderate intensity. We used some strategies as we just looked at for optimizing digestion and absorption. So that was not eating in a stress state, trying to increase stomach acid and improve / fix the intestinal permeability. Another important note that I've just remembered actually on stomach acid is less than 1500 calories will massively down-regulate stomach acid production. So low stomach acid is really common in people that are on very low calories and are micronutrient deficient, because you need several micronutrients for stomach acid production. So symptoms of low stomach acid, the bloating, a bit of acid reflux, inability to digest meals, feeling sluggish after food, all of those symptoms of low stomach acid, that is going to be pretty common in people that are on less than 1500 calories, okay, especially if they've been there for quite a while. So we obviously needed to ensure all micronutrients were hit. We did this via chronometer, supplement protocol for the leaky gut, and over the next 2 months, we reverse dieted calories to around 2000, okay? Does anyone have any questions on the plan?
Ideally,
What was that, sorry, Mars?
ideally,
I'm so sorry, mate. Speak up, I can't hear you.
ideally, would you want the steps to be lower?
Ideally, yeah, sure. Not that necessarily steps are that stressful on the body physiologically to do them, but if you are having a client purposefully hit a step count, this is what we need to remember to go off on a quick tangent about steps, is NEAT is NEAT. So if you're making the client do a 1-hour walk to hit steps, like that's technically kind of EAT. The definition of NEAT is it should be someone's natural daily movement. So yeah, you can try and get them to up that by being more active, taking the stairs, doing all of that stuff. But if you were technically programming a walk, then it's like, yeah, that's steps, but it's technically exercise in the sense that you're programming it in. The definition of NEAT is it's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's away from being programmed in. Now, it may not be stressful for that client to go and do that walk. They may really enjoy it. It might not be a time stressor. You've got to remember with stress, something might be stressful physiologically, but not stressful psychologically. It might be stressful physiologically to train, but it might not be as stressful psychologically for the client to do it. Vice versa, steps might not be physiologically stressful, but they might be psychologically stressful if the client's going, oh my God, I've got to get in a walk. I'm too busy to do this. It's raining, whatever, right? Then it's psychologically stressful, even though the steps are not physiologically stressful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the case of Victoria, she was not going for walks. It was work, waitressing. So is that stressful? Yes, not necessarily the steps, but the whole process of rushing around, dealing with people complaining or whatever, that is the stressor, right? But also we have to look at what do those steps cost us from a calorie standpoint. If you're doing 12,000 steps and the client is struggling to hit maintenance, you can change that energy balance equation by making the steps 6,000 instead of upping food. That might be the same net difference to the energy balance equation. Does that make sense? So now if the client's going, I'm struggling to eat more, I don't want to eat more, the whole process of eating more is stressing me out, which is the whole thing we're trying to stop, it would probably be more beneficial to go, okay, instead of making this next jump in calories, I'm going to half your steps. And that net difference, that reduction in 6,000 steps, 6,000 would be more than 200 calories burnt. Call it 3,000 to 4,000 steps that you remove from their step target. That is going to be the same impact on the energy balance equation as maybe getting them to add 200. So instead of giving them the stressor of upping food, you might remove their steps. So it's not as simple as looking at calories and looking at steps. You have to look at why they're doing it, how they're doing it. Is it programmed in or is it naturally there? Do they want to be eating more or do they want to be eating less? Are you trying to up calories or are you trying to reduce calories? Of course, calories aren't just calories. You get micronutrients and macronutrients for them. So upping calories by 200 gives us macros and micros, which is a good thing. But if it's really, really stressing the client out to eat more and it's stressing the client out to hit their step target, the no-brainer option is not making either of those things stressful and just reducing steps. In Victoria's case, this was not a step target. Her steps were that high or higher. Sometimes they were even higher by default. So we need to look at it. Are they hitting their steps as a step target or is it their natural lifestyle? Do they want to be eating more calories or less calories? Is it stressing them out to keep their calories low or is it stressing them out to try and get their calories high? Is it stressing them out to hit that step target or do they want to be hitting that step target? Or is that step target not even a step target? It's just naturally where their steps fall. So that's kind of all the moving parts we need to like understand when we're making that decision. Does that make sense, mate?
Yeah.
So the specifics here for Victoria were not wanting to eat more and it wasn't a step target. So that's just where they fell. So could we reduce them? No. Was it stressful to hit that step target? No, because it wasn't a step target she had to hit. So the stressful part about them came from the calorie output, and the stressful part of it was actually the nature of the work, not that I have to go and do steps and it's raining and I don't want to do it. Cool. Everyone happy with that? Awesome. So here's just one example check-in. Victoria was amazing at giving lots of detail. This was just the email on top of the check-in form, which obviously was great. I'll give you all 2 minutes to read this in a second, partly because I really need the toilet and partly so you can actually read it because I think the language matters. But the main take-home point here is the reflections on what she's doing well, which obviously allows us to reinforce some positivity, and the emphasis on stress management, journaling, stretching, meditating, and sleep. Like I've communicated the importance of that to her right from the start, which means she understands the importance of communicating and checking in on it. So have 2 minutes of, well, Victoria, do you want to add anything to like this check-in and the check-in process and communication? Feel free to do that.
I probably went above and beyond, but I think like looking back at this now is really surreal. But I think the ability, and you really appreciated when I did this, it made me want to do it more. So when I went the extra effort to check in and you were like, oh, that's amazing, thank you, that's really helpful, that made me want to do it more. So as a client, the fact that I'm not doing this and you're going, oh, that was fine, thank you, the fact that you said this is amazing, it's really helpful, made me want to do that more. And I think that probably then helped your ability to understand where I was at.
Awesome. Yeah, your language as the coach matters. So not every one of my check-in replies, but if it's a good check-in, my check-in reply will start with, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Send it, write it, whatever, if it's a voice note or if it's a jumping on the call or if it's written, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know you're busy. I really appreciate all this information. It's really valuable. Personalize that part. It's really valuable to personalize that so that the client obviously understands why it's important for them, because your language does matter. You're reinforcing the importance of this check-in process. And then if it's a shit check-in, you know, I'll tell them. I won't say, you know, this is shit, of course not, but I will be like, hey, like, I really need some more from you here. You know, I can't coach what I can't see. I know you're super busy. Feel free to send it via voice note if you're happy to do that as the coach or whatever. But you need to not be afraid to tell the clients when they're not bringing their 50% to the table. But when they do bring their 50% to the table, you need to tell them why that's so great and reinforce that. Because when I say Victoria was consistent with checking in, she was consistent with checking in. It wasn't perfect consistency every week in terms of what we were trying to do, but no client's ever going to be able to do that, especially not going through a pandemic. Like, it's just not possible. But that's where it's also our job as a coach to educate the clients on the difference between the consistency of ticking boxes and the consistency of checking in and communicating, because it's not the same thing. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have a really bad week of ticking boxes, but you can send a really great check-in, which has lots of data, lots of communication, lots of your thoughts, lots of your feelings, lots of all of this really valuable stuff. They're not mutually exclusive. Vice versa, you can have a great week of ticking boxes and doing everything I ask, but your check-in could be crap. Does everyone understand how they're not the same thing? And that's so important. And you need to educate that on your clients, because otherwise they will say, oh, I didn't have a good week, so I didn't check in. No, these are the weeks you need to check in the most, right? So if you're a coach that is complaining about your rubbish check-in / consistency, that is not your client's fault. Take responsibility for that. That is your job as the coach, to educate from the get-go. Always bring it back around to being personalized why you need these check-ins, why they're going to be beneficial for you as the client and me as the coach. And then obviously be flexible and adaptive in your approach for how you check in. I don't really care if you're super busy and you have to send me a 10-minute voice note and jump on a call. Yeah, okay, I want some numbers and I want something written to view back, etc. Yes, but like if that's how it works for you this week, great. As long as you're giving me that communication and info and data and feedback, etc., etc. Okay. So does everyone understand the difference there in terms of those? The difference between you can have a good week but a bad check-in and vice versa, yeah? Cool. So if you are using my client handbooks, which are in the Google Drives for you to use with your clients, then please feel free. It's why they're there. They're white labeled. There's multiple slides explaining how and why you check in, and I really hammer home the importance of that on a call, and then I get great check-ins like this. So I'm going to leave you for 2 minutes just to read this, because I do think there's going to be some value in you reading this, looking at the language. Look at the I do in capitals. Look at the I will in capitals. Like, read the language. Look at the type of mindset I managed to install in Victoria around taking personal responsibility. So have a quick read of that, and I'll be back in 1 second. sorry about that, everyone. Put away some serious fluids out here in Thailand. Okay, so we're basically done, everyone, by the way. Obviously, if anyone needs to, no worries at all, but literally last couple slides. So 2 months later, Victoria did manage to get some tests redone on the NHS. So in 2 months, just a few of the key markers, and this is me copying and pasting them. Can I flick back, please? Yes.
Thanks, Reader.
Remember, you'll have the slides as well, or feel free to take a print screen or take a photo on your phone.
I just wanted to get that last sentence. Sorry. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. You were super fast.
Oh, was
Peed
I?
quick. You peed quick. So.
There's no stairs in the villas here. Everything's on one floor. It's very not that common to have stairs in Thailand. So, okay, so just a few markers. A few hadn't really moved. It's obviously only 8 weeks, but several had a good amount. And this is key because ultimately you're putting in the work as the client. It is difficult. Like Victoria's had a couple of foods she's removing. There's some foods I'm really trying to get her to eat. You know, she's tracking in chronometer. She's doing some like daily stress management technique, etc., right? So you want to see that pay off. And getting your menstrual cycle back can take 5-6 months. It's quite a long time to not get a reward from the work you're doing. So retesting blood markers can be really great for that. So we have here, obviously, one of the white blood cell markers. Okay, it's gone up by 0.2. Globulin, one protein marker, and total protein, so globulin and albumin, both of those are up. The waste product of protein metabolism is up, and potassium is up. Okay, great, awesome. That's good as the coach because it makes sure we were tackling the problem in the correct way. So it's also really important for you as the coach, okay? Also really nice because you can say to Victoria, amazing work, you know, you've been putting in the work for 8 weeks. Look, it is moving in the right direction. All of these are still out of range. No, sorry, potassium is now exactly back on range, the minimum it can be ideally. Total protein is a little bit under. Yeah, so they're still all basically under, but they're getting back to towards where we want them, okay? Which is great. So now we can be like, just rinse and repeat. It's only a matter of time, you know, just keep going basically. So the current situation, there have not been any bloods that have been redone since. So we've got like last October and December, and then or last September and November, sorry, and nothing since, okay? But we are now all the way up to about 2,500 calories. The cycle came back 3 months ago, obviously able to train more as a result of that. Weight is now 10 stone 7 pounds, which is an 18-pound increase. And yeah, that's it. Okay, so over to, well, firstly you, Victoria, anything you want to add about those last 2 points? How did it feel to see your bloods improve? How do you feel about your current situation? How do you feel about your weight? Because you haven't really gained any body fat, very minimal. So how do you feel about all of that?
I think it was upping food to 2,500 was scary, especially in a diet culture where people are saying, oh, you should, like a lot of my friends, I don't know, are trying to lose weight and they're eating 1,500. But obviously I had to realize that I'm on a different journey to them. So the thought of upping was really scary. So that's when like your education was really valuable to me and just saying, look, you need to do this because this, and this, but breaking it down into like understandable. I love the way that you always use diagrams, so like the triangle and stuff. That was really valuable because just throwing a load of information at me was quite overwhelming. Seeing the bloods move was exciting because nothing else felt like it was moving. So I didn't get my period back straight away. So it was really infuriating. And then when you said, look, get your bloods done again, and then you could see change, that was like, it was a massive incentive to continue. Because at times I just wanted to be like, screw this, I want to diet again. So seeing that change, even when the period wasn't back, was really helpful. Yeah, I can't really remember what else was on there. But yeah, I think, and the thing you said about the jump in calories, like doing it in stages, was probably most beneficial for me, because upping calories was scary, like I said. So I think that was valuable as a client, like you saying, look, we don't need to go straight to 2,500, because that was quite stressful. The thought of that was stressful. Yeah, and then the day I got my period back was the best day ever.
Yeah, awesome. Well done. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, in case anyone's wondering, we wouldn't have gone straight to 2,500. That would have just caused a bunch of potentially unnecessary fat gain, depending on what body fat percentage the client's at. I think off the top of my head, what I initially calculated I wanted straight off the bat was like 1,950 to 2,000, but that was just such a big jump from where Victoria was, that like it was kind of a meet in the middle compromise situation at about 1,750, and then took a few weeks to get to 2,000. And yeah, you know, like in the grand scheme of things, what's 2 or 3 more weeks away from the amount of calories you want someone at? Sure, it's not ideal. You're probably still regressing in that time. So even though calories are higher, if it's potentially still a deficit, potentially still nowhere near high enough, that potentially is going to cause some regression. So one mistake I see a lot of coaches make with reverse dieting is not really understanding it. And they make like, oh, we'll go up by 100 calories. If your client was losing weight and you up their calories by 100, they are still in a deficit. Yes, it's less of a deficit, but they are still in a deficit. All of the negative adaptations that occur as a result of a calorie deficit that you are probably trying to undo, hence why you're doing the reverse diet, will still occur. And even though the deficit's a bit less, the accumulation of time is only getting more. And that's probably what's going to increase the severity, not the fact that maybe you've given them 100 more calories. So if you've got a client and they're losing weight and you decide to reverse diet, that jump ideally needs to be straight to maintenance. But if that's a big jump, then maybe going one in between a couple of weeks is potentially going to be that, here's what would be ideal, but my client is so far over here, let's meet them where they're at and try and find some kind of compromise in the middle. So I would have loved Victoria to have gone straight to 2,000, but you know, what you don't want is a client to be like, I just can't eat this, stressing me out. And then actually they end up at 1,500 because that's just where they're naturally at. And then you check in and you go, did you hit 2,000? No, I was hitting 1,500. I'd rather she was hitting 1,750 than 1,500. So we kind of had a jump in between. Now, when you found maintenance, yes, that's when you make smaller jumps. If you add 500 calories to maintenance, your client's going to gain some fat. So you make small, very small incremental jumps from maintenance to try and increase that number. But if they're in a deficit, you want to jump straight to maintenance ideally, okay? Otherwise you're still in the deficit. So what one of those two you choose depends on the situation your client's in. If they are actively losing weight, they're in a deficit, right? If they have come to you and their weight has plateaued on 1,500 calories, and it's a true, honest 1,500 calories, then that is their maintenance. So now, sure, you may only go to 16. You could potentially still be a bit more aggressive due to how low that number is. But the point is, it is maintenance because their weight has stayed the same for however many weeks leading up to the situation that we are talking about, right? So whether they were losing weight or maintaining weight, as you all know, determines if they were in a deficit or maintenance, and that determines how big of a calorie jump you make. And then you just assess your calculations in line with the individual in front of you and what may or may not be realistic and sustainable and setting them up to win. And then you decide on the number. When you get to 2,500 calories, macro ratios become pretty irrelevant because by default, you're getting in more than enough of the minimum of each. So at this point, I'm really not too bothered once protein's met what the exact ratio of fats and carbs, right? Because carbs are above 200 and fats above 70. So anything above that, whatever, right? So yeah. Anyone got questions on any of that?
Victoria, do you struggle to, I realised I was on mute. Do you struggle to stay at 2,500 and eating that amount of calories now? Do you have, is it, a struggle to maintain that?
Mentally, yes. But like, I really enjoy eating. I always have enjoyed eating. I think the thing that Leo kind of did for me was the mindset thing. So the mindset shift of knowing that, okay, it's okay to eat that, or I need to eat that. So sometimes I think, oh my God, 2,500 calories. Mentally, I think that's a lot of calories, especially when people around me are saying, oh, I'm doing the 5-2 and I eat like 500 calories a day. That mentally it's hard to comprehend that I'm eating 2,500 calories. But in terms of actually consuming the food, I genuinely enjoy it. So it's really nice that I can, and I find it less stressful than when I was eating less calories, because then I was stressing that I was going to eat too much. Whereas now I find the whole situation a lot less stressful, because I'm like, I can have 2,500, like Leo says, it's fine. And I'm still not really gaining much weight. And I know that I've got my period, etc. So no, I don't find it physically hard to eat it. Sometimes mentally it's hard, but then I'll go to Leo and he'll be so understanding. He'll be like, come on, like it's right. You are supposed to be eating this. And then
Did you find it hard? Yeah. Did you find it hard to choose when you first upped your calories to choose the foods that you were going to up it with? Like,
good question. So again, I think the fact that Leo broke that down for me was less overwhelming. So if he said to me, right, you can up your calories, eat it where you want, then I'd be like, oh God, that's hard to choose. But because he kind of broke it down into fats, protein, and I knew that I needed to eat more protein, that was already decided for me. So there was no like decision fatigue and deciding what I was going to eat that day. I knew that when I upped calories, I needed to personally up my protein. I was eating quite a lot of carbs and fats. I knew I needed to up protein, because Leo would kind of put that in a chart and say, look, on chronometer as well, protein's really low. So I always personally knew to eat it to eat more protein. But I think without Leo giving that breakdown, or being said you need to eat this amount of fat, carb and protein, I would feel overwhelmed. I wouldn't know where to eat it, and I'd probably eat it from the wrong place, because I would choose to have something delicious obviously over a chicken breast or an egg. So Leo deciding that, or being told that I need more protein, definitely was, I found it a lot easier.
And Leo, with your upping of protein and stuff, was your first port of call to obviously have natural protein sources, or, you know, having a supplement with a shake, that side of things? Like, often my clients really struggle around protein. What did you recommend?
Whey powder is a byproduct of the dairy industry. The idea that whey powder is not natural is just not technically correct. So the idea that it's not natural because there's some preservatives added, because otherwise it's dairy and it would go off, versus everything else people eat, which is also full of preservatives and comes in a box and a packet, is just ridiculous. Whey powder is not really a supplement, you know, in many ways. So yeah, definitely, like, if you've got a client that's struggling for appetite, is struggling to up food, doesn't want to eat more, 100%, you'd be silly not to use whey powder. And it has a better bioavailability than egg. It's why egg's 100 out of 100, and then whey powder is now 104 out of 100, because it was discovered after that index was created. So, you know, it is, if you had to rank them, it's the best protein source you can get. So you'd be silly not to use whey, really, for most people in any situation, especially in this context. So one whey shake, one collagen shake per day, purely for the diversity of those different amino acids, and collagen being used for our intestinal lining. I would never really use a collagen protein powder in any other instant other than intestinal permeability, but a collagen protein powder or bone broth, you know, same thing, or gelatin, you know, is going to be beneficial there. So yeah, definitely, like 120 grams of protein per day, which is about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight for Victoria that we started with. Obviously, it's a lot for her, and it's a big increase. And then also, you know, people are busy, maybe they don't want breakfast. So like, yeah, of course, right, 100%.
Sorry, one more question. And Victoria, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but could you tell me a little bit more about what your diet was like before? Were you really health conscious on like having quote unquote good foods, or was it a mix of just getting whatever you could have to hand and sugary snacks or things like that?
So I think I am very health conscious now, and kind of was before. I did eat sugary snacks, and I would always had a sweet tooth, so I would snack on sugary stuff. But I think what Leo taught me and was about protein mainly. That was really, I don't know why, but I remember that being the big thing. I am quite health conscious, but I think before it was probably more unhealthy. So I was choosing to have things because they were low in calories. Whereas now I'm health conscious, but I understand that I should eat, I don't know, something that's higher in fat because it's better for me. So still similarly health conscious, but I think a better understanding of what's healthy, as opposed to my focus being on losing weight, knowing that, okay, I'm not going to gain weight, but I need to keep my period. So focusing, I think just shifting the mindset of what is healthy was probably really important in my journey.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
No worries.
Maybe you two could meet up for coffee in Worthing when this is all over,
Yeah.
and you can chat about that more if you want.
I'm always here to, I'd always speak about it. I'm always here to help.
Awesome. One other thing I'd love to add to that quickly, you mentioned about like you like eating. I feel like a lot of people like eating and they don't want to eat little. I feel like a lot of the time when a client tells you, I'm struggling to eat food and I don't, want to eat, it's not that we weren't brought up like that. Like they probably weren't like that when they were 14. So it's not that they actually don't like food or that they don't like eating. It's just these conditioned beliefs over time that, food is the enemy and you've got to look a certain way. It's usually more that than them actually not wanting to eat. I normally find, like, as Victoria literally said, like eventually when you work on that mindset stuff, whatever that specifically is to the individual, you will normally find that the client does actually like eating and is happy eating more and wants to do that. They just, have an unhealthy, negative kind of relationship with food, basically. So putting plenty of time and importance on speaking about that, working through that can be really valuable, because that obviously then facilitates the client feeling happy and positive about wanting to eat more instead of it being something that they don't enjoy. Does that kind of make sense? Awesome. Okay, cool. Erin, any questions from you or anything else from you, Lucy? So on Monday, we're going to go into the menstrual cycle. And yeah, Wednesday next week is the bonus lesson. Thank you, Erin. Thank you for being here. So yeah, next Wednesday is going to be the bonus lesson, 7:45 a.m. UK, which is 2:45 here, which is 3:45 Bali. What other time zones have I forgotten? I think that's 4:45 New Zealand. And that's going to be all about the 1 to 4 small group model, which is going to be amazing. So please try and come along if you can, if you coach in person or even online. If you like some in-person coaching, but you hate all the downsides that come with it, because there's a lot, the 1 to 4 model really solves all of that. So even if you're an online coach, but you kind of miss or want some in-person coaching, then this could be a really great chat for you. So that's Wednesday at 7:45 a.m. UK. And then the usual Monday and Thursday next week for those lessons. Cool. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will speak to you all in the group, etc., as needed.
Thanks, Leo.
Bye. Thank you very much, everyone. Let me know what questions you've got. Thank you.